Hi everyone, it's Dalton Lynne. I'm trying something a little different this time. I have kept the autofocus on the camera, so I hope that you can't hear the lens focusing as it tries to stay on my face. The last video was a little bit, it focused more on the microphone, not my face, and it just looked a little off. Anyway, so today's review is going to be a book review, and it's going to be The Night Manager by John Le Carre. And it was published in 1993. It's a big book. It's just under 600 pages long. I listened to the audiobook version of this. I just don't have time to sit down and read books anymore. So audiobooks are the way to go for me. So The Night Manager is about an undercover operation to bring down a notorious arms dealer, and his name is Richard Onslow Roper. And the protagonist of the story is Jonathan Pine. He is a British soldier who is no longer, well, he's a former British soldier. He's no longer with the military. And he works now as a night manager in a hotel in Zurich. And at the beginning of the book, Roper comes in with his entourage, and Pine recognizes him because he remembers a Roper from a previous job he had when he worked in Cairo. And Roper had had this woman killed who Pine loved. She was killed because she had been revealing details of Roper's illicit activities. So he had her killed. Pine never forgot that. So basically, the story just details Pine's determination to bring Roper down. And of course, there are other side characters involved in the operation, different intelligence people, different intelligence organizations, and how they work in kind of opposition to one another. So there's a lot of other political sort of things that are going on, but that's really the basis of the story. And so I'm going to give my review on that. And the reason that I was interested to read this book, I had never heard of it before until last year when the miniseries came out. And it looked interesting. I started watching it, and then I decided to stop after about the second episode or so because I thought, well, I would like to listen to this book and see if that would make me interested to actually finish watching the series or make me feel a little bit more invested in the characters. So that's what I did. Oh, and to add a note to that is that since I have finished the book, I did start rewatching the miniseries, and I think there's only, maybe 6 or 8 episodes, something like that. So I'm interested to see the differences and the similarities between the two different works. So performance-wise, I am going to give this, for the audiobook narrator, I'm going to give this a 4. I think that he gave a solid performance. His name is Michael Jaston, and he did a really good job of capturing the essence of the characters and letting you be able to distinguish the different characters that he was narrating at the time. I especially liked how he did the voice of Sophie. It really seemed to capture her essence very well. He had this smoky sort of husky quality to her voice, and it seemed like that would be just the type of character that she was. And I really appreciated that. And he did a really good job with the other characters too. Some characters weren't quite as easy to distinguish as others, and I don't know how much of that was just maybe my issue. Maybe I just wasn't focusing enough because there's all these different intricacies going on and these different people involved, or if it had to do with just the overall British writing style of the author. And I will explain what that means in a second. I know that sounds kind of odd. Anyway, so in relation to what I was mentioning about the British writing style, that's going to tie into my rating for the story, which is a 3.5 stars. Now, when I say British writing style, it's a little hard for me to explain. I have encountered a style similar to Le Carre's at least once before, and that was with James Phillips in his Guy Winters mystery series. And I'm really not sure how to put it into words. These two people write in such a way that you're just kind of dropped into the middle of the story. And it's like you're expected to just absorb all the different characters and all the different elements that are going on in the story. And it can be confusing to a listener or reader, especially when it involves multiple characters within an organization or a group, and there really hasn't been a clear enough distinction between them from the beginning for whatever reason. So this was an issue for me, and it's what kind of caused me to bump it back from maybe what would have been a 4-star rating. This just kind of was a frustration. And like I said, I don't know how much of it was just me. Maybe I wasn't focusing on what was going on enough or what, but that was just my overall impression. And on top of that, there were these, especially in the beginning, there were these strange flashback incorporated into present type moments that felt very disorienting as a listener. And there were also some long-winded scenes that were going on with other characters, side characters. I felt like it could have been toned down just a little. It just seemed like they went on a little too long, and they were talking about, it was like they were talking a whole different language with the way they were discussing things. And so it kind of all felt a little bit pointless to me. Sure, it probably wasn't. It just felt that way. And finally, something else that bothered me was, but this is a spoiler part, so I'm going to have to preface this with a spoiler warning. If you don't want to hear this part, maybe jump ahead to whenever I stop, and I'll put the timestamp, the time notification of that somewhere in the video, so you're not hearing something you don't want to hear. But it was how Jonathan was found out by Roper's people. That part bothered me a lot. I can't quite put it all together, but I think it had something to do with Roper's idiot female. You know, there's always got to be this love story type interest. Sometimes I wish they would just keep the women out of some of the stories because it complicates the situation. It seems to me like Pine was found out by Roper's people because he had confided in Roper's girl. That there was obviously some attraction between Pine and this girl. He'd confided in her what was up. And so she calls him while he's away with Roper. She calls him up and she's talking to him on the phone. She's using his real name. And basically, I think that's had something to do with how Roper's folks found out that Pine was not who he said he was. And of course, you know, and Pine, to me, it bothered me that he wasn't forceful enough. And instead of just when she calls and she's talking to him and calling him by name, and why didn't he just pretend? And it even mentioned that in the book, and he was thinking to himself, he should have just said he didn't know who she was. Well, yes, he should have, because that was the whole reason he was found out. And I realized at some point he had to be found out. But that was just a really retarded way, in my opinion, to have him be found out, because there was this ridiculous woman who, even though she'd been warned of the dangers, she wasn't listening. And even though he knew of the dangers, he just went ahead and went on with it, and they were having their little romantic talks on the phone. And that was just, that did not sit very well with me. I had a real problem with that, as you can tell. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, in the end, it just made him seem like a weak little pansy of a guy. He's supposed to be this big, very talented special agent type ex-British soldier dude, and he's brought down because of this silly woman that calls him up, and they're talking on the phone, a phone that can be tracked and traced, whatever. And it really made me dislike the female character to a large extent. But so these were problems for me, and just taking everything into account, it's what made me rate the novel down a little bit lower than I might have otherwise. So after all of that, it may seem like I just absolutely couldn't stand this book. It was a horrible experience, but the reality is it wasn't. I'm going to give this an overall rating of a 3.75, and that is, bumping it up from a 3.5 for the story. The narration, the performance kind of saves it. Also, this was a very long, intense book. It was about, I think I've already said how many pages it was, but it was about 19 hours worth of listening. And it didn't feel like it was that long. There were not a huge number of get on with it moments for me. At 19 hours, I guess it could have been worse, but it wasn't. I felt like the whole thing flowed pretty well, despite some of its issues, which I've already enumerated, and in addition to the narrator's performance. That's what kept this book from being rated overall at a 3.5 or less. So I'm really interested to see now how the miniseries compares to the book, and I cannot say that I'm sorry that I read the book, just that I'm not as enthusiastic about it as I'd hoped to be. And that's how it is for me. So anyway, I don't say these things to dissuade you from listening to the book or reading the book. You may have a totally different experience than I did, or you may have had if you've already listened to it or read it. These are just my opinions. I can be a little finicky or picky about certain things in books and characters. And so I hope that if you listen to it or read it, that you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it for whatever reason, if you want to just share any opinions about it, go ahead and leave comments below. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.